The studio lights of Jimmy Kimmel Live blazed as the audience applauded wildly. Tonight's guest was someone Hollywood had nearly forgotten, Val Kilmer, the once magnetic star of Top Gun and Batman Forever, now rarely seen in public since his battle with throat cancer. As Kimmel announced his name, Kilmer emerged from backstage walking deliberately, a hint of that famous confidence still visible despite the physical changes cancer had wrought. He wore a colorful scarf around his neck covering his tracheostomy tube and carried a small electronic device in his hand. The audience's applause held a note of sympathy, something that didn't escape Kilmer's keen eyes. Jimmy greeted him with his typical humor, but when he made an offhand joke about Kilmer's lengthy absence from Hollywood, something shifted in the actor's expression. Instead of the polite chuckle expected from talk show guests, Kilmer pressed a button on his electronic voice device, waited a beat, and delivered a response so unexpectedly hilarious and brilliantly cutting that Jimmy's mouth fell open in shock. The audience erupted in gasps, followed by thunderous laughter. Nobody, especially not Jimmy Kimmel, had anticipated that the night would turn into one of the most memorable television moments of the year, or that Val Kilmer would remind everyone exactly why he had once been Hollywood royalty. For most of the 1980s and 1990s, Val Kilmer was Hollywood's golden boy. His performances in films like Top Gun, The Doors, Tombstone, and Heat cemented his reputation as one of the most versatile actors of his generation. His portrayal of Jim Morrison was so uncannily accurate that even the surviving members of The Doors couldn't tell the difference between Kilmer's voice and their late frontman's in some recordings. His Iceman in Top Gun created one of cinema's most memorable rivals, and his Doc Holliday in Tombstone delivered lines that fans still quote decades later. But Hollywood's memory is short, and its loyalty shorter. When Kilmer was diagnosed with throat cancer in 2015, his career was already in a different phase. The leading man roles had become less frequent, replaced by smaller parts in less prominent films. The cancer and subsequent treatments ravaged his voice box, requiring a tracheostomy that dramatically altered his speech. The actor, who had once been known for his perfect vocal performances, now communicated with the help of an electronic device. For many, this would have meant a quiet retreat from public life, but Val Kilmer had never followed Hollywood's expected script. His 2021 documentary, Val, revealed a man who refused to be defined by his illness. Using thousands of hours of footage he had personally recorded throughout his career, he told his own story, not with self-pity, but with surprising humor and profound self-awareness. It was this documentary that had brought him back into the public eye and led to tonight's appearance on Jimmy Kimmel Live. Backstage at the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio, the energy was tense. Producers whispered about how to handle the interview, concerned about Kilmer's health and speech limitations. Would he use his voice device? Would the audience react uncomfortably? Could Jimmy strike the right balance between humor and respect? Val Kilmer sat alone in the green room, reviewing the questions that had been approved beforehand. He smiled slightly as he read them, occasionally making notes with a pen. A production assistant checked on him periodically, clearly nervous about the Hollywood legend waiting quietly. "Mr. Kilmer, we're ready for you in 5 minutes," she said during one such visit. Kilmer looked up and nodded, giving her a thumbs up. She couldn't read his expression. Was he nervous, confident, resigned? His eyes, still as intensely blue and perceptive as they had been in his Top Gun days, revealed little. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel was finishing his monologue, working the audience with jokes about current events and celebrity gossip. As he transitioned to announcing Kilmer, he adopted a more serious tone. "Our next guest is truly a Hollywood legend," Kimmel said. "He starred in some of the most iconic films of the 80s and 90s. In recent years, he's faced some serious health challenges, but he's here tonight to talk about his amazing documentary, Val, and his remarkable career. Please welcome the one and only Val Kilmer." The audience applauded enthusiastically as the band played. There was genuine affection in the welcome, but also curiosity about what condition the once vibrant star would be in. Kilmer walked out with deliberate steps. He wore a stylish black suit with a colorful scarf artfully arranged around his neck to cover his tracheostomy tube. In his hand was a small, electronic device, his voice assistant. His face showed the signs of his health battles, but his eyes were alert and thoughtful as he took in the audience. He and Kimmel shook hands, and the host guided him to the guest chair. The audience's applause continued, perhaps a bit longer than usual, carrying that distinct note of sympathy reserved for beloved figures who have visibly struggled. As the applause died down, a moment of awkward silence followed. How would this interview proceed? Could Kilmer communicate effectively? Would Kimmel handle the situation with the right touch? The tension was palpable, not just for the audience, but for everyone involved. Kimmel broke the silence with his characteristic grin. "Val, it's been too long. Hollywood hasn't been the same without you. I guess you've been giving other actors a chance to catch up, huh?" It was a typical Kimmel opener, friendly, but with a subtle edge. The audience laughed nervously, uncertain whether this was appropriate given Kilmer's circumstances. And this was the moment when the unexpected began to unfold, when a routine talk show appearance would transform into something nobody had anticipated. Kilmer smiled at Kimmel's opening comment, his eyes crinkling with amusement. He lifted his electronic voice device and pressed a button. After a brief pause, the computerized voice delivered his response. "Thanks, Jimmy. I figured after playing Batman there was nowhere to go but down, so I decided to take a 2-decade intermission." The audience laughed, relieved that Kilmer was able to joke about his absence. Kimmel nodded appreciatively, visibly relaxing now that the ice had been broken. "Well, you've certainly been missed," Kimmel continued. "For those who haven't seen it yet, your documentary Val is absolutely fascinating. You've been filming your life since you were a kid, right?" Kilmer nodded and used his device again. "I've recorded thousands of hours. My children think I have a serious, hoarding problem, but with video instead of cats." The audience chuckled. The interview was progressing more smoothly than many had expected. Kilmer's electronic voice was clear, and though the delivery lacked natural inflection, his timing and choice of words conveyed his legendary wit. "Now, Val, you've worked with some of the biggest names in Hollywood," Kimmel said, moving to prepared territory. "Tom Cruise, Robert De Niro, Al Pacino. Any good stories you can share that didn't make it into the documentary?" Kilmer took a moment to type a longer response into his device. "Well, when you work with Tom Cruise, you sign about 12 NDAs. So legally, I can only tell you he's either 3 inches taller or shorter than you think, and I'll let you guess which." The audience roared, and Kimmel grinned. "That's diplomatic of you." But as the interview continued, Kimmel began to steer into more sensitive territory. Whether it was the comfort of Kilmer's easy responses or the temptation to create a viral moment, he edged toward questions about Kilmer's reputation for being difficult on set, stories that had followed the actor throughout his career. "Val, there's been a lot said about your, intensity on set," Kimmel began, his tone deliberately casual. "The documentary touches on it a bit, but I've heard some wild stories. Is it true you refused to answer to your name during The Doors unless people called you Jim?" A subtle shift occurred in Kilmer's expression. The easy smile remained, but something flashed in his eyes, a glimpse of the intensity that had made his performances so compelling. He typed carefully into his device. "I believe in commitment, Jimmy. When was the last time you committed so deeply to something that people thought you were difficult?" There was an edge to the computerized delivery that somehow came through, despite the lack of vocal inflection. The audience oohed quietly, sensing the subtle pushback. Kimmel, a veteran host, pivoted quickly. "Fair point. I commit deeply to pizza and disappointing my doctor during physicals." After the audience laughter died down, he shifted again. "Speaking of commitment, you actually made yourself physically ill getting into character as Doc Holliday in Tombstone, right?" The tension eased slightly as Kilmer typed, "Yes, I stayed in an ice bath so long, my lips turned the right shade of blue. Probably should have just used makeup in retrospect. As the audience laughed, Kimmel sensed an opening to return to edgier territory. You know, you've had some legendary feuds in Hollywood. There was that thing with Joel Schumacher on Batman Forever, and I heard Harrison Ford called you the most unprofessional actor he'd ever worked with. Care to set the record straight? The studio grew quiet. This was exactly the kind of question that publicists dread, directly addressing long-standing negative rumors. The producers backstage exchanged nervous glances. Had Kimmel gone too far? Kilmer's face remained composed, but he took longer to type his response. When the electronic voice finally spoke, the words were measured. Hollywood loves its myths, Jimmy. Makes for better gossip at parties. The truth is, usually more boring. Some directors and I had different visions. As for Harrison, well, I don't think he's forgiven me for turning down the role in Willow that made him work with Warwick Davis instead. It was a diplomatic answer, but not the soundbite Kimmel had been fishing for. The host nodded and glanced at his notes, perhaps realizing he needed to shift approach. Let's talk about your health journey, Kimmel said, his tone becoming more serious. You've been incredibly brave in facing throat cancer. How has that experience changed you? The audience grew quiet, and the energy in the studio shifted to something more somber. This was difficult territory. How Kilmer would respond would determine whether the interview maintained its surprisingly upbeat tone or turned into something more emotional and potentially uncomfortable. Kilmer began typing, taking his time with this response. The silence stretched as the audience waited. When the electronic voice finally spoke, there was a poignancy to the simple words. Cancer shows you what matters. Fame doesn't. Money doesn't. Being able to say, I love you to your children does. The audience responded with sympathetic applause. Kimmel nodded respectfully, but then, whether from a producer's whisper in his earpiece urging him to lighten the mood, or his own instinct to avoid too much emotional territory, he attempted a joke. Well, at least the electronic voice gives you perfect delivery every time. No more flubbing lines, right? The joke landed with a thud. A few uncomfortable laughs scattered through the audience, but most remained silent, sensing the comment had crossed a line. Kilmer's expression didn't change, but a long pause followed, stretching the awkward moment. This was the pivotal moment in the interview, the point where it could either implode into uncomfortable territory or transform into something unexpected. The tension in the studio was palpable as everyone waited for Kilmer's response. Val Kilmer looked at Kimmel for a long moment, his legendary blue eyes assessing the host. The audience held its collective breath, sensing they were about to witness something significant. Then, deliberately, Kilmer set down his electronic voice device on the side table. Kimmel shifted uncomfortably. Val, I didn't mean to. Kilmer held up his hand, silencing the host. Then, to everyone's surprise, he began to speak with his own voice. The sound was raspy and strained, the result of his tracheostomy and extensive treatments, but the words were clear enough to understand. You know, Jimmy, he said, each word requiring obvious effort. Everyone expects the guy with cancer to be either inspirational or pitiable. The audience was completely silent now, riveted by the unexpected moment. But what if, Kilmer continued, pausing occasionally to gather strength, what if I'm still just the same sarcastic jerk I always was? A ripple of surprised laughter moved through the crowd. Kimmel's eyes widened, clearly not having expected this turn. People see this, Kilmer gestured to his throat, and they think my story is about loss. But that's lazy writing, Jimmy. Bad character development. Kilmer's natural voice, though damaged, carried the nuance and timing that had made him a star. Despite its raspy quality, it conveyed layers of meaning that the electronic device couldn't capture. You asked how cancer changed me. It didn't. It revealed me. Big difference. He reached for a glass of water and took a careful sip before continuing. Everyone's looking for the dramatic arc. Val Kilmer from Hollywood. Heartthrob to cancer survivor learning deep lessons. But what if I already knew what mattered? What if I've been the same person all along, just with different packaging? The audience began to applaud, but Kilmer wasn't finished. And as for flubbing lines, he said, his eyes twinkling with the mischievous charisma that had made him a star, I seem to remember watching a compilation of Jimmy Kimmel bloopers that runs longer than The Irishman. The audience erupted in laughter and applause. Kimmel himself was laughing now, shaking his head in admiration. So maybe, Kilmer concluded, we could both use an electronic voice sometimes. The audience burst into a standing ovation. What had begun as an awkward moment had transformed into something authentic and powerful. Kilmer had taken control of the narrative, not with anger or defensiveness, but with humor and profound self-awareness. Kimmel, a skilled comedian who recognized when he'd been bested, stood up and offered his hand to Kilmer. Ladies and gentlemen, Val Kilmer, proving that even with half a voice, he's twice as eloquent as the rest of us. Kilmer smiled and shook Kimmel's hand, the tension completely dispelled. The host leaned in and said something the microphones didn't catch, but Kilmer nodded appreciatively in response. As the audience continued to applaud, the cameras captured the faces of people in the front row, some wiping away tears, others smiling broadly. This wasn't the manufactured emotion of typical talk show moments. It was something genuine breaking through the polished television format. The producers, recognizing the power of what was happening, signaled to Kimmel not to cut to commercial yet. This was television gold, the kind of authentic moment that couldn't be scripted. Val, Kimmel said as the applause finally died down, I think you just gave us all a masterclass in how to handle a tactless host. And speaking as that tactless host, I'm both humbled and amazed. Kilmer picked up his water glass in a mock toast. Don't worry, Jimmy. Being occasionally tactless is your brand. Being occasionally difficult was mine. Seems like we're both living up to our reputations. The audience laughed again, appreciating how Kilmer had turned the earlier awkwardness into a moment of mutual understanding. You know, Kimmel said, we had all these questions prepared about your famous roles and Hollywood stories, but honestly, I think you've just given us your most memorable performance right here tonight. Kilmer smiled. Well, this one was unscripted. Those are always the best ones. He paused, took another sip of water, and added, and unlike Batman Forever, I don't have to wear rubber nipples for this one. The audience roared again. Kimmel doubled over in laughter. What had started as potentially one of the most awkward interviews in the show's history had become one of its most genuine and entertaining moments. As the laughter subsided, Kimmel steered the conversation back to Kilmer's documentary. Seriously though, Val, your film is extraordinary. The amount of footage you've captured throughout your life gives us a view of Hollywood and fame that we rarely get to see. Kilmer nodded, returning to his electronic voice to preserve his strength. I always believed in documenting reality, the computerized voice spoke. Even when the reality wasn't flattering to me, that's what makes it so compelling, Kimmel agreed. You don't try to make yourself look perfect. Perfect is boring, Kilmer's device responded. Flawed is interesting. That's true for characters, and it's true for life. The conversation had evolved into something deeper than the usual talk show banter. The audience remained rapt as Kilmer shared insights from his decades in Hollywood and his battle with cancer. You know, Kimmel said, one of the things that struck me about your documentary is how it shows the gap between public perception and reality. People had all these ideas about who Val Kilmer was, and many of them weren't accurate. Kilmer typed thoughtfully before responding. We do that to all public figures, flatten them into caricatures. It's easier than seeing the complexity. Is that why you decided to tell your own story now? Kimmel asked. Partly, Kilmer's device spoke, but also because we all have a limited time. Cancer reminds you of that. I wanted to share the footage that had meaning to me while I still could. What had begun as an entertainment interview had transformed into a conversation about legacy, perception, and what matters in a life well lived. The audience, expecting celebrity gossip and film anecdotes, instead received something far more valuable. As they moved toward the end of the segment, Kimmel addressed the moment that would undoubtedly go viral. "Val, I have to thank you for how you handled my thoughtless joke earlier. Most people would have either gotten angry or shut down." Kilmer typed his response. "Getting angry requires energy I'd rather use elsewhere, and humor has always been my preferred weapon anyway." "Well, you definitely destroyed me with it," Kimmel admitted with a laugh. "Consider it a professional courtesy," Kilmer's device replied, one entertainer to another. As the interview wound down, Kimmel held up Kilmer's recent book, I'm Your Huckleberry, and the DVD of Val, encouraging the audience to check out both. Kilmer nodded appreciatively at the promotion. "Before we wrap up," Kimmel said, "is there anything else you'd like to share with people who are watching?" Kilmer thought for a moment, then set aside his device again. With his natural voice, strained but determined, he said, "Remember that everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Even the people who seem to have everything. Especially them sometimes." The simplicity and sincerity of the statement left the studio quiet for a moment before applause broke out again. Kimmel stood and offered his hand to Kilmer once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, Val Kilmer." As Kilmer rose to shake Kimmel's hand, the audience gave him another standing ovation. The camera panned across faces showing genuine emotion, not the manufactured reaction shots of typical talk shows, but real connection with what had just unfolded. After the show, clips of the interview immediately began circulating online. "Val Kilmer destroys Jimmy Kimmel" was trending within hours, but not in the way such phrases usually imply. There was no anger, no celebrity feud to gossip about. Instead, viewers shared a moment of authentic human connection, breaking through the polished veneer of late-night television. Backstage, after the cameras stopped rolling, Kimmel visited Kilmer in his dressing room. What was said between them remained private, but crew members noted both men were smiling when Kimmel left. In the days that followed, views of Kilmer's documentary skyrocketed, and sales of his memoir saw a significant boost. But the most lasting impact was less tangible. In comment sections and social media discussions, people shared how the interview had changed their perspective, not just on Val Kilmer, but on illness, resilience, and the human capacity to maintain dignity and humor in the face of life's greatest challenges. A week later, Kimmel addressed the viral moment on his show. "Last week, Val Kilmer taught us all something about grace and authenticity," he told his audience. "I've been in this business a long time, and I thought I'd seen it all. But that moment reminded me why we do this, not just for laughs or ratings, but for those rare occasions when something real breaks through." As for Kilmer, he posted a single message on social media. "Thank you for listening, both to my electronic voice and my real one. Both have something to say." In a world where celebrity interactions are often manufactured for maximum drama and minimum substance, Val Kilmer and Jimmy Kimmel had accidentally created something different, a genuine moment that reminded viewers that behind the personas, behind the headlines, beyond the flattened caricatures, were simply two human beings finding connection through honesty and humor. And in that authentic exchange, they had created not just great television, but a template for how we might all handle our most difficult moments, with grace, with wit, and with the courage to speak in our true voice, however that voice might sound.